Hello, and thank you for attending today's Microsoft Dynamics Business Applications, Adapting Your Sales Processes to Today's Buyer webinar. Feel free to get social during the webinar using our hashtag MSDYNApps or MSDyneApps. At the end of the webinar, you'll find information about the speakers you'll be hearing from today. We also invite you to watch our previous webinars on the screen. So with that, I'd like to introduce our host for today, author and president of Social Centered Selling, Barbara Giamanco. Barb, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good to be back with everyone again today. We're going to be talking about another very dynamic conversation relating to sales. This is the Microsoft Dynamics Business Applications webcast, and today we're going to talk about how you adapt your sales process to today's buyer. Today's buyer has definitely changed, and that necessitates salespeople doing things a little bit differently themselves. So today, a few of the things that you can expect to learn are how digital, social, and mobile has impacted buyer behavior and what that means for people in sales. We're definitely going to spend a lot of time talking with my two guest experts about how to define and develop that sales process. We also are going to talk about how you can achieve consistent sales performance through a consistent sales process that drives the right sales behaviors and skills. As part of the conversation, we'll also talk about how content and your messaging needs to be adapted at various stages of the buying process. So with that in mind, I want to go ahead and introduce and welcome my two guest experts who are joining me today. Janice Mars with Sales Latitude. She is the principal and founder of Sales Latitude. She is going to be joining us today, as well as George Brontian, who is the CEO of Membrane. So George and Janice, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
All right, so before we kick off with what I know is going to be an amazing conversation about why sales process is so important to drive sales performance, let's let the audience get to know a little bit about the two of you. So Janice, briefly tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So my name is Janice Mars, and as Barbara said, I'm the principal and founder of Sales Latitude. And what we do at Sales Latitude is, honestly, we help our customers meet or exceed their quota. And we do that by helping them maximize their time by looking through the lens of the customer. And we spend a tremendous amount of time doing sales process work, coaching for large account and key opportunity reviews, and work with sales leadership and executive leadership, helping change management so that you can actually incorporate all the new processes, skills, and training that we do.
Excellent. George, what about you?
Yes, George Brontian here. I'm the founder of Membrane, and I guess my background is as a software entrepreneur. I'm a tech geek, I guess, a software freak, and I've built some companies, and while doing so, I've realized the importance of selling, and I did pretty much all the mistakes in the book and realized that, wow, there needs to be some structure around how we go about selling, which is why I founded Membrane. And Membrane, what we do is that we help companies execute a sales strategy by systematizing the best behaviors and the best practices a company needs to capture and clone from the best people down to all their salespeople. And we work a lot with consultants like Janice, who go about creating the strategies and designing the processes, and then we help those to be implemented and executed upon.
Outstanding. Well, the two of you, when I knew we were going to set up this webcast, I thought of the two of you immediately because you do have such extensive background in this particular area. So let's go ahead and get started with the conversation. I think often a sales process is kind of thought of as, a customized formal approach that includes a sequence of steps, right, to-dos, milestones, and goals, and different things that you want to be achieving during the sales cycle. And I always like to kick off by hearing from the guests, how do you define the process? So Janice, how do you actually define sales process when you're talking with customers? How do you help them understand what that really means?
Yeah, Barbara, that's an excellent question because I think the word sales process kind of gets bandied around and does mean different things to different people. I like to be, kind of make things simple. I look at sales process as the what, right? what are the sales stages, which obviously change depending on what your role is, what are the key sales activities, and what are what I would call verifiable outcomes or measures of success, which is the buyer's process. So kind of mapping the buyer's process to the seller's process along the appropriate stages. So if sales process is the what, then I look at sales training as a how. And that's how I typically differentiate what sales process is.
What are your thoughts on that, George?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Janice is saying, that especially specifically that there are so many different definitions of what a sales process is. So if I ask 10 different sales managers, they will have 10 different answers. And sometimes the most rudimentary answer is, well, it's the drop down in the CRM. And I think there's much more to it, as Janice is talking about now. And I think there is also confusion between process and methodology. So the what and the how. But I think those need to be married as well to really make a good effect. Because if you don't know the how, your process won't help you much, because you don't know how to move between the milestones.
Well, so talk a little bit more there, George. You mentioned the difference between process and methodology. Help us understand what that difference is.
Yeah, I like the definition that Janice did. I sometimes talk about, or I like to use metaphors. So it's like if we have a map, we want to go find a treasure. So we have a treasure map, and that will show us, okay, you need to move from this point, and the X is over here. So that's, and you draw a line how to get there. That's sort of the process. But along the way, you will bump into a lot of different obstacles. So mountains and swamps and all these stuff. And in order to get across those, you need some skills. And that's sort of the methodology, where the methodology and the how comes in selling. If you don't know how to get over that mountain, you won't get to the next milestone in the process.
Absolutely. Well, now, process is really important, but we also know that sales departments and salespeople themselves are often kind of resistant about following a formalized process, or even having a formalized process in the first place. I've heard things like people fear that it'll inhibit, their sales team's ability to be innovative or respond flexibly to the demands of each sort of situation. So, Janice, what do you think about that? I mean, is that one area that one reason why people resist, and are there other reasons for resistance that you see in working with your customers?
Well, actually, as you were reading off the list, I was kind of chuckling a little bit, because I honestly am not sure why sales departments resist. However, I have to say, we see it all the time. A lot of the people who I'm working with, in many cases, they're concerned that their top performers will leave because a process will make selling too rigid for them, or maybe the executive management or sales management is a little bit too tolerant for mediocrity. I sometimes don't understand it, because there are just so many benefits. There are more benefits to sales process than not having a sales process. So honestly, my answer is, typically I'm not sure. But what I always like to do is, every organization has their own culture, has their own experiences, their own background. And typically, I just like to understand specifically, as I'm talking to different customers, the people within that organization, what is the resistance, and then like in anything, handling it as an objection and trying to break it down into its pieces and parts to understand specifically what is it that's holding them back from resisting formalizing a sales process. Because many organizations have a sales process. It's just kind of either sits in a drawer, or as George said, it sits in your CRM, but nobody really looks at it. So I guess my answer is, I'm not sure, but it's very specific to an organization.
Yep. All right. Good point. What are your thoughts on that, George?
Yeah, I'm thinking while Janice was talking. I think one thing we humans love is autonomy. We don't want to be told what to do. I think that plays a big part in this. And I think also like Janice was talking about, the best performers, they're sort of seen as heroes within those organizations. and they don't always want to share their secret recipes. So I think that can sometimes be a cause for resistance, especially if they have a compensation system in place where they could lose by sharing, which we see sometimes is actually the case. So
excellent. We're going to. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go forward about some of the other things that play out. But I think you're absolutely right, George. I can see that, compensation models also could get in the way of people making sure that they're collaborative and sharing and, and following that process. Well, then let's start talking about some of the benefits. So George, in terms of following that consistent process, how does it drive sales performance? I mean, I get it. As salespeople, I know for myself anyway, I don't really want to waste time on activities that aren't going to drive sales performance. But if I know it will do that, what are some of the benefits that salespeople and the sales organization themselves gets from having that consistency in process?
I think the most basic is probably just to prevent mistakes. So I had this issue in my previous company that we sold an automation software. And when you sold this, you could, an IT company could move from having 0% profits to up to 30% profits on the bottom line. So, of course, any CEO, any management, any ownership will go crazy if you can get that kind of improvement. However, the technicians weren't going that crazy because they were really afraid of losing their jobs. So unless you got the technicians interested in the solution and what it could do for them, the deals would just die. So having a process could prevent that, because you would make sure that all the salespeople would engage with all the stakeholders and make sure that all the stakeholders understand the benefits for them specifically. So that's one example, just preventing silly mistakes that are being made.
What about you, Janice? What do you think?
Well, I totally agree with George. I'll kind of take a slightly different angle to the question. So when I see a lot of sales processes, I see sales processes that they've either defined the stages, and that's all they've done, or they've defined the stages and the key sales activities, all great work. But in a lot of cases, I don't see where they've mapped the buying process accordingly. So when you're looking for, how does sales process drive, sales performance? In many cases, it could be just through looking at it through the lens of the customer and getting a better assessment as to where is the buyer in their buying process and how does that align to the forecast. I find many times when I was talking in corporate America, when I worked in corporate America, or when I'm coaching my customers currently, a lot of the forecasting is done based on what the salesperson says is where they are in a sales process. But to really drive that sales performance consistently, if we kind of just turn it around and include the buyer's engagement and forecast through that lens, I think people get much more accurate forecasting, and I think that definitely boosts sales performance. I also think that it's, and we've heard this before, it's also easier to onboard and get people up to speed quicker. I mean, as George said, there are many, many reasons how it can help a sales organization.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you've said, and how novel, Janice, that we need to be thinking about this from the customer, the buyer's point of view, right? Because salespeople believe they're going to win every single deal all the time, and so I think it is important to take that perspective. I also think about other things like the ability to reach the right targets more quickly, as you already said, more accurate forecasts, and the ramping up new salespeople. I think also, don't you think, George, deals have less of a tendency to stall out if people are following a particular process, right? Because they're not missing certain steps in their approach, don't you think?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that the process, when you have milestones in there, and you also are looking at the customer's point of view, you need to have that timing aspect so you can ensure that you're having that momentum all the time and not be there and sitting with your forecasts that have been missed and you're seeing the same deal. So yeah, definitely. I think another benefit that I was thinking about is to share a common language about selling. So when we're talking about the pipeline and each deal, we should have the same kind of terminology. I think that's an added benefit as well.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah. So so in a big company, I guess it's maybe assumed, but at what point does a sales team, does the sales leader know that a formalized sales process is really needed? Who wants to jump in and start on this one? Janice, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, that's not a problem. I mean, actually, it's interesting, Barbara. I was just, when I see this question, I just recently wrote a blog post about this. But because I think that a lot of organizations struggle with this question, like, how do I know? And actually, how do I know that my sales process, what makes it formalized, right, versus informal? They could ask that question as well. I'll talk more from what I've seen and in talking with my customers. When your forecasts are consistently inaccurate, that's a good sign, right, that you probably need a more formalized. If you have those deals that I call they cascade quarter to quarter, right, the close dates change quarter to quarter, those are always good signs. Maybe when your sales reps are being reactive, when they're talking about deals, they may lack control over the next steps. So when you're starting to ask questions about a deal and they respond something like, well, I think, typically it's because they're talking from their point of view, right, the salesperson's point of view, and you have to kind of get them to understand, where is the customer in their buying process. Trying to think of other examples that I have. Salespeople, rushing to demo or rushing to get a proposal done, or even better yet, looking at those activities as like key selling events, right? Those are all. I mean, there's tons of examples that we can use, but those are some of the top ones that come to mind when I think of when my customers are asking that question. Those are the things we look for.
Anything we missed, George?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the type of selling you're in. So, Janice, you mentioned the stall deals and missed forecasts and deals that are just rotting away. What I'm thinking about is that I see a lot of companies that are getting the types of selling they're doing mixed up. So they have very transactional selling.
That's a great point.
And then they have very complex selling, and they think they can have one sales process for both, and that's not true. I mean, you may need to have multiple sales processes based on the type of selling you're involved. So I think that's an interesting thing to reflect upon as a sales organization.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, George. And then now we also have to consider, to your point, both inbound and outbound, right? So what the process might look like when you've got say a sales development team and they're taking the inbound calls versus what it might look like if they're chartered with going outbound to do the prospecting and maybe the initial lead qualification, right?
Yeah. And actually, maybe you need to break your process up in multiple processes. So you have a prospecting process, and then you have an opportunity process. That could make sense, and you might even have two teams doing those because those are two very different types of jobs.
Absolutely,
if you're
without
selling
question.
something.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to put in a little bit of a plug for Mary Lou Tyler and Jeremy Donovan. Just happened to see Mary Lou speak last week in Boston and have her book that I started yesterday sitting right here on my desk called Predictable Prospecting. And obviously what I love about it is they really advocate for a very systematized approach, which I think we all know in working with sales teams, often there isn't that systematized approach. Well, so here's the next big question. So you need the process. Now what do you do? Or you may even have a process, but it's clearly not working for some of the reasons that we talked about with the pipeline's unpredictable and forecasts aren't accurate, and the results aren't really happening across the sales team as they should be. So what are the next steps? So I'm wondering, George, maybe kick this off for us. Who needs to be involved in putting all this together? I mean, you just mentioned that you will have different processes, even as it relates to perhaps prospecting versus moving qualified opportunities. How does an organization kind of get started and set themselves up for success here?
Yeah, great question. I think it depends on the size, of course, of the organization, but in general, you will want to extract all these best practices out of the heads of your customers and what made them buy, and also, of course, from your sellers, the top performers. What are they doing? How are they doing in it? What are they preventing to do to not lose deals? So I think everyone needs to be involved in that in a very creative type of workshop. I think Janice is maybe better suited. She's probably done a lot of these workshops with clients, but I think it's really key from my perspective to get all the people in a room and not have someone come in and say, here's your sales process and this is the methodology, just do it. Because we're back to that autonomy question, like everyone will resist it. So if they're engaged in creating the process, they will be much more willing to use it.
What are your thoughts on that, Janice?
Well, I couldn't agree more, George. If an organization doesn't own the process, it will rarely get implemented. We go about it similarly with a little bit of a different twist. We definitely, want to be able to talk to their top performers. And I found your comment before interesting. There's a lot of times that they are reticent to share best practices. But typically what we say to them is that imagine if we're talking to one of your peers, somebody who you respect who's also a top performer. Let's just say that exists in the organization. What if we could tell you one or two things that they do that maybe you used to do or you got lazy and don't do anymore or whatever it might be that would enhance and maximize your efficiency for close or losing deals early? Would that be beneficial? And that's usually the case. What we find, though, is a lot of top performers, it's in their gut. So, of course, extracting that information can be difficult, but that's kind of our job. I definitely agree that you should be talking to your customers, but we go the extra step, and I like to talk to organizations that my clients have not been able to sell into. Right? They haven't. It's a target. They're on their target customer list, but they haven't been able to expand the relationship to the level that they want. And when I talk to those people, which is a little bit harder to sometimes get the appointment and get the meeting, what I'm really trying to find out is not so much how the current organization that I'm representing, how their salespeople have sold into this particular target listed customer. But what I'm trying to understand is when the best salespeople come and talk to them, what do they do? Right? What are some of the best practices? What are some of the key activities? What are some of the things that they do that help the buyer, right, get to their end goal and minimize the risk? And then we kind of, put that all together. And then I totally agree with what George said. You really just need to get, all those. I'll call them those. There's always those people in an organization that are like the influencers in the organization, and you definitely want to get them together, vet out kind of all the information you found. And like I said at the very beginning, it's got to be their process. It's got to be their words. It's got to be, every nuance of it has to be agreed to by this group of influencers. And then we hope that they're going to proliferate that to the organization.
Now, interesting that both of you have mentioned, this notion of getting in the head of the customer. And Janice, I like actually what you said about trying to figure out why somebody didn't buy from your organization. What were what happened with the company they chose to purchase from? What was going on? What kind of sales behaviors were exhibited? Do you find that when you bring that information back to the customer, are they surprised, or are they not surprised?
Again, it depends. I would say the majority are surprised and many are not. And I say that because it gets back to, what you were kind of saying before. I know we shouldn't be surprised that, I guess let me say it a different way. It makes common sense that we should be looking through the lens of our customer, but we shouldn't be surprised that many salespeople don't do that. And it's usually that nuance, which is the differentiator, right? So those who know that they should be looking through the lens of the customer, but just either, get lazy or forget or whatever it might be, they're not as surprised, right? Because they know, it's kind of like, oh, I know that. But those who really don't have that insight, and it's something new to their organization or new to how they sell, they don't even know what they don't know.
Sure.
So therefore it is a little bit of surprise. But the good news is it's an easy thing to correct, right, over time.
Absolutely. So the organization has now built out the sales process, gotten all the stakeholders together in a room. We've already talked about some of the things that are getting in the way, but surprisingly, this came out of some research from Objective Management Group last year, and 68% of salespeople either don't have or just do not follow a formal, customized process. And so you've been talking about some of the reasons why it's really important, and why maybe they're failing to execute against some of those things. So it's not just incentive, but how do sales leaders go about helping to shift the behavior or the mindset or the attitude with those sales folks who, for whatever reason, just don't follow the process? What do you think they can do?
Well, I'll take that to start. Typically it has to do with some sort of change management process, right? Do they have one? Is it consistent? Are the sales leaders and the management, are they walking the walk and talking the talk? The sales reps, they're very astute, and they're always assessing, is this kind of like the new flavor of the month, right? Especially if it's an organization where they throw a lot of change at the sales teams. So if they do that and there's no follow-up, then they kind of understand, well, I'll do it just for compliance sake, and then eventually it'll go away. And, this silly thing called sales process will just be the next flavor of the month. But those organizations where management, it incorporates it into their DNA and really makes an effort from a top-down approach to get people to go from compliance to value, which is different for different individuals. I think that's where you start seeing, I'm turning this into a positive, right? Where you start seeing salespeople executing against the sales process.
I like that. I like that phrase, compliance to value. What are your thoughts on this, George? We've talked about some of the things that might get in the way. What else do you think is maybe kind of holding them up from following the process?
Yeah, I think this comes back to them not buying into the reason of having a process in the first place. And I think the managers is where we need to focus here, the sales managers. A common problem is that we promote the best salesperson into a manager, but we don't give them the training and the resources and what's needed to really succeed in that role, which is a completely different role than being a sales performer. So now you have to sell through your team and not be the one selling it to the customer. So that's a really big shift in mindset. And if you're a salesperson that don't really buy in to process, and then you become a manager, you don't buy into process, and then you should implement the sales process, everything can become quite difficult for you. So I think it needs to start in the leadership. They need to understand the benefits, and then the salespeople need to be engaged in the creation. I think then when you get that buy-in, everything becomes much easier. So yeah, that was a long answer to a simple question, but yeah.
No, not a long answer at all. I thought it was very well said, and you make an excellent point in that. And of course, isn't it interesting how there is the tendency to want to promote top performers into sales management roles, and that may or may not be the right thing to do, and certainly they're not getting the background of the education. But excellent point, George, that they also may be bringing their own personal biases about the sales process into that management position, which can also certainly get in the way. Well, now we've talked a little bit about thinking about things from the customer's point of view, from the buyer's point of view. I think there are still quite a few opportunities that exist for sure. But let's talk a little bit about the fact that buyer behavior has changed, and it's sort of necessitating us to do things a little bit differently. Now, when you think about that sales process, does it affect forecast and pipeline accuracy? Because here's the thing, I know I talk with sales leaders a lot, and this seems to be a big problem for them. So how does this help improve that for them?
Yeah, I can go first on that, I think.
Go for it.
I'm sorry, Janice. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think definitely it will affect forecast and pipeline accuracy, but I think the important fact here is that you need to have a very clear definition of when your pipeline starts and when it ends. And I see a lot of confusion here. So especially now with inbound marketing, a lot of companies are just throwing all their leads into the pipeline as opportunities. And you haven't really qualified them in. They're just marketing qualified leads, but they shouldn't be in your pipeline, according to me, at least not if you're in a more complex sales environment. So I think then if you have a good definition of where an opportunity enters the pipeline and how we qualify it in, how we qualify it out, and you coach accordingly, yes, you will have a much, much, much better forecast accuracy.
Yeah, it's interesting, George, if you kind of take that to the next level, and I know you're kind of talking at the kind of the qualification stage. I see that all the time. But again, you know, different sales organizations, you know, are set up differently, so that makes perfect sense. But I see that, you know, when those leads are kind of getting tossed from kind of a lead gen, you know, inbound to, you know, to more of outside sales, having some sort of a, you know, a qualification grid of some very standard questions that allows them to understand, you know, kind of their the customer's willingness to win and the buyer's, you know, willingness to buy, can at least quickly weed some of those out. And again, you know, what you said, Barbara, a lot of what, you know, when I saw that question, I thought, you know, absolutely, right? Does a well thought out sales process affect forecast and pipeline accuracy? But again, I go back to looking at it through the customer's lens and making sure that your sales process reflects what are the key activities that you expect the buyer to be doing something. So as an example, if you didn't have the buyer's process aligned to the sales process, then if somebody was doing a proposal, as an example, they may check off and say they're in the proposal stage. But from the customer's point of view, they may not be anywhere close to the proposal stage, or you might be column fodder, right? They may have already selected somebody. They may be way past in their sales process, right? So being able to assess, right, from the customer's point of view, and as a manager, being able to ask, you know, how do you know that? And who told you that, right? And how did you validate it? Can really give you tremendous insight, a lot different than, well, I just submitted a proposal, so check, I'm in the proposal section.
Yeah, that's a good point. And George, you were chuckling a little bit. Do you have something more to say about the whole proposal idea?
No, it's exactly what I was thinking about. I mean, I see the exact same thing happening. You have to be thorough in your qualification. You can't run 3 steps ahead of the buyer, because you will not help yourself, you won't help the buyer. So that's definitely very important. And then apart from the pipeline accuracy, you can have a great pipeline accuracy, but if your goal is 43% win rate, that's not good anyway. So I think it's also going, hopefully, if you do it right, it will affect your win rates. So those should go up significantly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as I was thinking about what you said, George, with the inbound, you know, interest in my opinion, downloading a white paper, signing up for your webinar, those things, you may be interested, but I don't see those as leads. And so it's fascinating to me that people would just want to put them all, into CRM as an example, and then they haven't really been vetted or qualified so that, you really know there's something coming along. And I got to be honest with you, in all these years of selling, if I start an initial conversation with somebody and we're having a bit of a conversation, it seems like it's going well, but then they say, oh, why don't you put together a proposal for me? My instinct is to say, well, let's just step back a minute, because I don't get excited about that. I actually get nervous about that because I figure they're either way down the path, as you said, Janice, or it's just too early and it's just a common default for them to say, hey, get me some more information.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about, right? Go ahead. I was going to, go ahead, yours.
No, okay, no, you go this time.
Yeah, no, well, I was going to say, just to add to what you were just talking about with pipeline accuracy, and just imagine if you really understood your buyer's timelines, right, and could align your close dates to better reflect not your quarter end, but what the customer is trying, what the customer is trying to accomplish, which, by the way, is not close a contract, right? They have hopefully they have some compelling event or something that you're going to help them achieve a business outcome, and they want to be able to do it in a certain time. So, again, looking at it from the customer's point of view, your close dates, right, and working kind of backwards with your customers can also help you with the pipeline accuracy as well. And in a lot of cases, I see those type of things, call them a joint evaluation plan, a sequence of events, documents, something that you're jointly sharing with the customer that says that you're aligned from a date perspective, can also take that to the next level. Right? There's all different type of things just came into my mind.
Yeah. One thing I just want to throw in there quickly is that I see a lot of confusion when it comes to activity versus progress. I think that fits in nicely here, and I talk about that often. Great point. So you're measuring all these proposals, and you think you're making progress, but you don't know when those are being sent out, because if you're sending them out early, you're probably just hurting yourself. I love what you just said. Did you say column fodder?
Yes.
So you quote sending out quotes to help a competitor. Yeah. So a good process also needs to tell you, as the manager, as the leadership, when are we doing things in the process, and that's when you can tell, are we actually making progress, or are we just doing busy work?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's a great point, which leads to where we are today. And I think so many people talk about the buyer's journey, but it still seems to not be quite sinking in. Buyers, because of the internet and social networks, do have the ability to start self-educating themselves early in the process. And so, to the point that both of you have made, activity versus progress, and do you know where you are? It's interesting to me that often sellers will come to a conversation with a buyer and they want to start right at the beginning. Let me tell you all about the features of our product. Let me do a demo for you. But often buyers have already moved forward past a lot of that, and I think of it as an opportunity to validate, not just start over. What do the two of you think about what's been happening now that buyers have the ability to start a lot of what was traditionally part of the selling process without us?
Janice, want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Salespeople need to spend more time understanding the buyer, and the buyer in an organization could be the project manager or could be the CEO or anybody in between. And each of those different individuals, right, have different goals. And so, we have to understand who are we selling to, right, and then educate ourselves to make sure that we can have a relevant conversation with whoever we're talking to. When we talk to different salespeople and we ask questions like, do you know who the decision maker is? Typically a salesperson will say yes. But if you ask, what is the specific business outcome or what are the priorities, and the answer is some feature function, right, then most likely they are not doing the correct amount of research to understand that they're not talking to the decision maker, because they're not talking in C-level conversation. So right. I find that, I find salespeople just need to spend more time understanding the buyer, and I kind of use that term loosely. That's what I'm saying. Who in the organization are you selling to? and talk in the way that they talk. I know a lot of times when I'm talking to, well, whether it was somebody who reported to me or somebody that I'm coaching, they'll say, well, I have to go to talk to the CFO, or I have to go talk to the CEO, and I'm uncomfortable having those conversations. I just say to them, why don't you just talk to your CFO or your CEO and try to find out the type of things that are top of mind? Because what you don't want to have happen, and this always gives me a chuckle, you absolutely do not want to ask, like kind of what keeps you up at night. Remember those days?
I do indeed.
And I think that's where buyers who can self-educate, we need to be able to kind of know more about what they're concerned about, have relevant conversation, understand industry's trends, talk to them about things that provide value, because they're busy people. They're executives, they're busy people, and you have to, if you're going to take the time, you have to make sure it's relevant. And I know that in a lot of times when I'm coaching on large opportunities, if we have an hour meeting with a C-level executive, we may prep for that for a few days.
Absolutely.
Or longer, right? In order to be able to ensure that meeting is successful and the outcome of that meeting, is a win-win for both parties. You can tell I'm pretty passionate about the subject.
Oh, yeah. What are your thoughts on that, George?
Yeah, this is kind of the hot potato. Everyone has been talking for a couple of years about this, and it's really interesting. And what I've learned is that, first off, we need to ask ourselves, what are we selling? Are we selling something that has a very low risk for the buyer? I think then we should just remove all the friction and make it super simple for them to self-educate and just buy it online. We don't need salespeople for that at all. But if we're involved in more complex selling, which really ties to the level of risk the buyer will be taking when buying this from you. So if there's a risk involved for the buyer, I think that the whole deal will become more complex and there will be more stakeholders involved. Now you need to engage with all of them. But who has really been educating themselves? What we're seeing is that a lot of these people educating themselves are people that have been delegated a task to fix something. Please go find a marketing automation system. Go educate yourself and report back to me. So a lot of times the salespeople are engaging with the researchers, so to speak.
Right.
And not with the C-level people. And they're spending all their time with these researchers who won't be making any decisions at all. So you need to be sure that you then engage and understand, okay, how will this decision be made? Once you have all this information, what will you do with the information? So it comes back to who are you talking to? Who should you be talking to? Because I see a lot of salespeople just talking to the wrong people. And they're following their sales process, which is really a sales process and is not a helping our buyers to buy the right solution process, which it should be.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that, George, for sure. And I think it's to Janice's point, right? I think sometimes people get comfortable talking with people at certain levels in the organization. And I don't find it difficult to talk with execs in the C-suite. Maybe that's because I prepare, or who knows the reason why. But one of the things that I thought was great, Janice, was your suggestion. Go talk to your own CFO. And there's also this thing called the internet and social channels and business intelligence tools. And right, there are lots of ways, the company's website, there are lots of ways to go get information to help you better educate yourself about common problems in a particular industry that you're selling into, common issues that certain C-level executives are facing. I personally am sometimes stumped as to why more emphasis is not put on the research. But that could get back to things like, and this is a hot button for me, is, our managers just managing this, measuring against this activity like you were talking about, George, but not making sure that the activities are the right ones to kind of move opportunities forward. So when we think about trying to get salespeople to kind of shift their behavior, they need to shift their behavior because we know buyer behavior has changed. How do we do that? What are some suggestions that you would offer up to sales leaders who are thinking about how to make this work? George, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think it's really a change management process, like Janice was talking about earlier, and the managers will be key to make this work. So they will need to be able to coach a lot more than they may have in the past. So how do we make sure that someone introduces new behaviors, because it's so easy to just rubber band back to what we've always been doing. So it's sort of when you start working out, it's if you have a personal trainer, it's going to be much easier. And I think when you're going through change, you really need to have that manager be at your side and coach you. And the sales process, if you include the methodology and enablement functionality and all that, with technology can play a big role in that as well. But really the understanding and that buying that, wow, okay, something has happened out here. Now I need to change. I think is probably the first mind shift that needs to happen, and then support that with the right process, right tools, and coaching from the manager.
Right, and I like what you said. It's equipping the sales leader, because it's going to be hard for sellers to change behavior if the sales leader hasn't, been equipped or has the same, sort of belief, and making sure that that change needs to happen. So, all very good points. Anything else you would want to add there before I move us forward, Janice?
No, I think on that one, George nailed it. I think change management is key, and I think it's a top-down approach. I think the only thing I want to add is that there's a big difference between quality and quantity, right? Yes. So are we counting the number of proposals? Are we counting the number of calls? Or are we looking at the quality, right? And hopefully a sales process, if it's done correctly, will enable you to coach to understand more of the quality of the information. It's just something I wanted to add.
Yes, no, couldn't agree with you more. So now that you've got the sales process and you want to make it easy to follow, do you need to integrate that with your CRM system?
Yeah, I mean,
I'll take that.
Logical.
I mean, it does, but it's interesting, George, because I know the side that you come from, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense. My answer is you should, right? But not always, right? Some organizations are not technology-focused organizations, and
right.
and so therefore a CRM is so foreign to them. I know that sounds antiquated, but organizations are where they are culturally. Not everybody. You might have an older sales force that's not as comfortable with technology, but I think that having a sales process integrated to your CRM, I think it makes change management easier, right? I think it makes coaching easier, but it has to be used, right? You could have it in your CRM and not look at it. You could have it in your CRM and not coach accordingly. But so I think it does make it easier, but I don't think you always have to have it. And again, I think it depends culturally on the organization.
And how you define a process, I guess, as well.
Yeah, perfect point.
But I think on that point, a good recommendation to make here is we also work with companies that have a antiquated view on technology, and one good suggestion there is to hire someone who's very technology happy as an inside salesperson or a sales operations role, who could support the teams that don't really feel comfortable using technology, because the benefits are really that large, I think, of course, as a tech freak, that you really need to have that data in the system.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because if you think about it, if the information is not kind of memorialized into a CRM type system, which typically becomes sales books and records, then when that person leaves, all that information is lost. And we've all seen that happen many, many times. So I'm not disagreeing, George. I just want to make sure. I just know that in reality, that's not always the case. But I love your recommendation. I think that's an easy way of going about it.
Excellent. Well, so in the last a little bit of time that we have for the session, one of the things we always like to do at as we're closing out the webcast is just to talk about some recommended actions that people could take to kind of get started, if they haven't already, or even a couple of suggestions that the two of you would offer for people who maybe need to go back and relook at their sales process and ask themselves whether or not it's aligning with the way the buyers are now typically buying. So, George, how about we start with you? What are a few actions you would suggest people who have been listening to the webcast could actually think about and start taking?
Yeah, I think just having a working session with the team and the managers and just going through how you sell and how you think buyers are buying and that whole change process that is going on. And maybe workshopping with some noted, what do you call them, the notes, the pink, the colored pieces of paper.
Oh, Post-its.
And noted. Post-its, that's what you call them. Sorry for my Swedish heritage here. And working with those to define like activities we do, milestones we have, milestones the buyers have, use different colors and just do a workshop session, and then you try to put that on a whiteboard and see what your sales process is and what's lacking and what's not, and bring in a facilitator who's a sales development expert, has been working with sales process and has that experience. I think that's a great first step to take, and not just jump into technology, which we see a lot of people doing. They just want to buy technology and get some kind of shortcut, but you have to do your homework first. You have to understand should your sales process look like, how's your buyer buying, what are they doing when they're not buying, etc. So that homework needs to be done.
I like that. And then they need to find and mind those gaps, right? So What are your thoughts, Janice? What are a couple things do you think that people could be thinking about in addition to what George has suggested?
So I would say in addition, and obviously, George, I like the idea of bringing in an outside coach or consultant to be able to help you with that. You know, I think one of the things that people like myself and others that do the kind of work that I do, we're able to provide a perspective because we do sales process work for a lot of different companies. And once I understand the buyer and how the buyer buys, I can provide, additional best practices because I have a library of things that, and they may not work for an organization, right? But by introducing them into the sales process in this workshop environment that you're talking about and having a conversation as to will that work or will it not work or will portions of it work or not can sometimes really maximize the efficiency of, progressing the sale. So I think that that's something that I would say can provide value. No idea is a bad idea because when they're kind of taken apart and put back together, I love the workshop approach and we do that. I think that for me, the key takeaway would be one of the things that I mentioned early on. Don't just talk to people who have bought from you, but talk to people who you would love to sell to and find out what's been holding you back from having to buy anything from you. And I think that's just a different perspective because all these pieces of information from all different perspectives, when you put them all together, can provide a very dynamic formal sales process that can really help the sales team, have your top performers benefit, have your core performers benefit, have your new sales reps benefit, et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, most of my work is done in complex sales, so my perspective is that way. And I love, George, your comment, because I have to remember, obviously there's transactional sales, obviously there's a lot of inside sales, et cetera, and each one of them has their own process. So we have to kind of look through all different lenses and then blend them together, depending on how they sell.
Excellent. Those are both great. Well, in the last few minutes that we have before I wrap up the program, I'm noticing that we have one or two questions coming in from the audience. So why don't I have each of you, we'll take those questions and then we'll go ahead and wrap up with some final thoughts. So, both of you have just offered up some great suggestions about how to get started. Can you tell us what are some of the common mistakes that sales organizations might make when they're trying to create or refine their sales process? What do you think about that, George?
Yeah, what we see people doing is that they overcomplicate things a lot. And especially when we get engaged, they usually have done their homework with what their sales process should be like, and they want to now enable it with our technology. And it's usually we need to help them scope it down because they've been too granular in everything. They want to create this perfect process, and they want to have these really stringent rules on things, and they're not being really realistic. So we have to usually get them to calm down, not be too process oriented, and then we need to break everything down and be more dynamic. Like, okay, this may be true sometimes, but not always. So let's make just a skeleton process. What would that look like? So I think that's a common problem where you see that you try to do it you're too ambitious when you go about doing the process sometimes.
Anything you want to add to that, Janice?
Well, I would definitely agree with George. I see that a lot. I think simple is better. I think it's easier to implement. I guess I also would see some mistakes that people make is not looking at the buyer side that we've been talking about, and also one that George brought up. Don't start with technology, right? Technology is, is to be used, to help the change management process, to help the coaching process. And I do see a lot of organizations where they start with the technology and then look at that as like the fait accompli. And you should really take a step back and work your sales process first.
Well, absolutely, couldn't agree more with that. There is definitely a tendency, and I don't know that it's getting better. It just seems that when there is a problem to solve, the tendency is to want to look for a piece of technology. But technology, in my opinion, only enables the process. It enables the process, and it enables people's ability to get to some destination. I think about social selling and how many people think that if you just do a few things on LinkedIn, all of a sudden sales just roll in, right? But there are also so many more things that have to happen, like having strong sales conversations and making sure that you understand the buyer's business. And there's so much more that goes into it. And technology, I think, is often seen as a potential shortcut. I mean, let's face it, we need CRM. It's super, super important. It doesn't actually go do the selling for you. So I think that's a very, very good point.
I saw a fun quote on that on LinkedIn, if I may add that. Fool with a tool is still a fool, and a fool with a tool on social is a multiplied fool.
That's very, very true, right? I mean, again, it's not the technology, and even if you have technology and you use it in the incorrect way, you're still going to have problems. Well, we really don't have time for any more questions, but I think this has been a very, very strong discussion about what's happening in the sales world related to sales process. So let me do this before I wrap up the program. Janice, I'll just start with you. Just tell us any other thoughts that you would want to leave the audience thinking about in terms of why having a sales process that your salespeople follow consistently is important.
As we've been talking about, I mean, you want a sales process not for the sake that you have a sales process and you can say you have a sales process, but you want a sales process because it truly is going to be able to allow you to spend the time on the opportunities and with those customers where you can provide the most value, right? You want to use it so that you're not only maximizing the salesperson's time, but also all the internal resources that you're using that are very precious to an organization. And I love the comment that George said, it doesn't have to be that complicated, right? It just has to be able to be easy to understand and one that's going to help you identify, the deals that you can, that you have a better percent chance of winning, and help you identify, deals that possibly, you need to lose earlier, and therefore maximizing your time. So that would be my 2 cents, if you will.
And how about you, George? Any final comment?
Yeah, I think I started on this whole journey with the company now that I'm now building because I was making a few assumptions that were simply wrong. So I was assuming that salespeople know how to sell my product because they've sold something else before. That's simply not true. So I think that's the key reason you have to structure how you sell. What do we do? How do we sell? Who are we selling to? All these things we've been talking to. So that becomes your, I don't know if this translates to English, but it's sort of your structure capital. That's what you need to be building with your sales process and a methodology.
Excellent. Well, you both have been terrific guests, and I very much appreciate you joining me here today. And thanks, everyone, for listening to the webcast. We've been having a great conversation with my guests, Janice Mars, who's the principal and founder of Sales Latitude, along with George Brontén, who is the CEO of Membrane, and actually joining us on the call today from Sweden. So I really appreciate both of you joining me today. It's been a great conversation about how following a better process really ensures forecast accuracy, quality of leads in the pipeline, more predictable revenue, and so many more things that we could talk about. There are other related on-demand presentations that you can certainly check out. Several of the ones that we have done in the past is Account-Based Everything and the Power of Aligning Sales and Marketing Alignment. So be sure to check those out. And I want to thank you very much for joining us today. If you'd like to connect with Janice and George, we have their contact information here for you. Again, it's Janice Mars at Sales Latitude and George Brontén at Membrane. Certainly feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about social selling, social media marketing, or social business. Would love to have a chat with you. So thank you, everyone, for attending our session today. Remember that Microsoft offers Dynamics CRM and a host of other business applications that support sales and marketing process and alignment between your sales, marketing, and service professionals. Why do that? Because you want to enable them to be much more productive and successful. We are living in a totally different world than just a few years ago, and so we want to make sure that we're delivering customer value based on knowledge and trust. If you have questions about Microsoft Dynamics business applications, you can certainly visit them on the web to learn more. So again, I'm Barb Giamanco. It's been my pleasure to host today's Microsoft Dynamics Business Applications webcast, talking about adapting your sales processes to today's buyer. Again, thank you, Janice and George, for joining me to talk about this topic. We very much appreciate your time and your willingness to share your expertise. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
And thanks, everyone, again, and look for more Microsoft Dynamics Business Applications webcasts coming to you soon. Thanks again. Back again another time.